It was Thanksgiving, and I couldn't believe my eyes. My parents handed me a crumpled $5 lottery ticket, while my sister Sophie gleamed with excitement, holding a glossy brochure for a luxury cruise worth thousands. My stomach twisted as their eyes lingered on her, full of pride, while I felt invisible, like I had been erased from the celebration entirely. The table was set with golden turkeys and steaming pies, the smell of pumpkin spice filling the room, but all I could taste was the bitter flavor of humiliation. My mother, Linda, laughed at a joke Sophie made, and my father, Robert, nodded approvingly, glancing at me only to shrug and continue their chatter. I felt my chest tighten, my hands fidgeting with the corner of the lottery ticket, wishing I could disappear. Before I go on, if this story speaks to your heart, hit that like button, subscribe if you want to hear more, and leave a comment with the city or country you're watching from and your current local time, only if this story truly resonates with you. I'm Emily Carter. I'm 30, and that night changed everything in my family forever. But let me take you back to where it all began, to that cozy, deceptively cheerful kitchen where the first sting of unfairness made itself known. I sat quietly at the edge of the polished dining table, my hands clenched around the lottery ticket like it was a lifeline, though deep down I already felt the weight of insignificance pressing on me. Sophie was chattering with Aunt Karen and her cousins Mia and Noah, showing off glossy photos of the cruise ship with sparkling pools and entertainment lounges, while I was left to sip my apple cider, every gulp tasting like the bitter echo of neglect. My father made a comment about how fortunate Sophie was to receive such a luxurious gift, and my mother nodded, smiling broadly, the kind of smile that excluded me entirely, as if I were not there at all. My brother Ryan, trying to lighten the mood, leaned over and whispered that at least I had a ticket, but even his words felt hollow, an attempt to fill a void that could not be filled with small gestures. I could feel a flicker of anger rising, but it was mingled with a deeper, sharper ache, a sense of betrayal so raw that it caught me off guard. Hours before, I had been hopeful that this Thanksgiving could be just like any other, filled with warmth, laughter, and a fleeting sense of belonging, but it had quickly dissolved into a landscape of comparisons, judgment, and invisible lines drawn between my sister and me. I excused myself to the kitchen, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath my boots, and leaned against the counter, staring at the flickering flame of the candles on the table, wondering if this was a pattern that would follow me for the rest of my life, always playing second fiddle, always overlooked, always discounted. I thought about my time in the military, where I had fought to earn every stripe, every commendation, every bit of respect, and yet here, in my own family, all of that seemed irrelevant, invisible, as if my accomplishments were merely background noise to their grand performances of praise for Sophie. The laughter and conversation continued downstairs in the living room, muffled but teasingly close, and I felt a sudden, piercing longing to be acknowledged, to have someone see the real me for once. In a half-hearted attempt to distract myself, I pulled out my phone to check messages, but there were none, just the hollow glow of the screen reflecting my own frustration back at me. I crumpled the ticket lightly in my fingers, thinking about how little it represented in their eyes, a mere token, a joke, something not worthy of attention or celebration. And yet, even in that small, discarded piece of paper, I felt the faintest pulse of possibility, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, the universe had something entirely different in store for me. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions swirling within, the mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief that kept building layer upon layer. My sister's laughter floated through the doorway, bright and careless, and I imagined the thrill she would feel on that cruise, the way the sunlight would bounce off the water, the music in the air, all the pomp and perfection designed to highlight her and minimize me. It was absurdly unfair, and the unfairness lodged itself, like a thorn in my chest, prickling relentlessly, refusing to let me forget that this moment, this holiday, was supposed to celebrate family, yet it only magnified the divisions and the inequities that had been quietly growing over the years. I thought back to the moments leading up to this, the subtle choices my parents made, the selective compliments, the quiet prioritization of one child over another, and I realized that this was not about a single holiday or a single gift. It was a reflection of an ongoing pattern of favoritism, a dynamic I had been navigating my entire life. I turned the ticket over in my hands, feeling the texture of the paper, the numbers printed faintly but deliberately, each one a symbol of chance and possibility. I had no illusions that this small piece of paper could change my standing in the family, but there was a flicker of defiance in me that refused to bow to the inequity displayed so openly in the living room. I imagined a world where this moment could turn into something more, where the tables might shift in ways no one could anticipate, where recognition, validation, and perhaps even a little poetic justice could arrive in the most unexpected form. The kitchen felt quiet, almost sacred in its solitude, as I contemplated the evening stretching ahead. Outside, the wind rustled through the bare trees, carrying the distant sound of children laughing and adults chatting in low, comfortable tones, oblivious to the storm of emotions inside me. I pressed the ticket to my chest for a brief second, feeling a strange mix of hope and skepticism, a private, almost sacred acknowledgement that this small, overlooked object might somehow be the catalyst for something entirely beyond the comprehension of those around me. In that quiet pause, I let myself remember the countless times I had proven myself capable, resilient, and worthy of attention. The awards, the missions, the recognition that had been earned with sweat and diligence, and I felt a subtle surge of quiet power. It was not loud or showy, but it was mine, a reminder that even when the world or my family did not see me, my value remained intact. And in that lingering thought, the first seeds of anticipation began to grow. The notion that the night could hold an unexpected turn, a moment where the invisible could suddenly be recognized, and the overlooked could finally step into the light. I breathed deeply, letting the mixture of tension, frustration, and faint hope settle into a kind of quiet determination, knowing that the evening had only just begun, and that what happened next could change everything in ways that nobody, not even my parents, could have foreseen. I decided to retreat further into the quiet corner of the kitchen, away from the sparkling lights and chatter of my family, clutching that flimsy $5 lottery ticket like it was a talisman against the tide of disappointment washing over me. Sophie was still animated, recounting the luxurious amenities of her cruise, her eyes shining with anticipation, completely oblivious to the storm brewing behind mine. My father Robert leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine and offering casual remarks that made it clear he thought the gift disparity was perfectly reasonable, as if the years of my dedication and achievements did not exist. I could feel the familiar weight of being overlooked, a sensation that had followed me for as long as I could remember, but tonight it cut deeper, sharper, as if Thanksgiving itself were conspiring against me. The clock ticked lazily, but every second felt amplified, each tick marking the invisible line between the lives of my sister and me. I thought about the family gatherings from my childhood, the subtle hints, the preferential treatment, the whispered praises for her accomplishments while mine were glanced over, and I realized that the patterns we live with silently mold the way we see ourselves. A wave of frustration mingled with determination surged inside me. I would not let this night, or any night, define my worth. I placed the ticket on the counter, tracing the numbers with my fingertips, each numeral a symbol of possibility in a life that often felt devoid of recognition. I remembered a mission abroad where the smallest misstep could have cost me everything, yet here, in my own home, my accomplishments were minimized by the loud display of favoritism. A soft hum of conversation and laughter filtered through the open doorway, and I realized that my anger was laced with a peculiar kind of resolve, the kind that stirs quietly until it gathers momentum and strength. I leaned back against the cool surface of the countertop, letting my mind wander to the improbable, imagining a scenario where that tiny piece of paper could upend the balance of acknowledgement and respect that had been so skewed in my family for decades. My mother's laughter floated through the air, tinkling like bells, accentuating the divide, and I felt the sting of exclusion sharpen into a clear focus. The soft glow from the chandelier above created patterns on the floor, illuminating the space where I stood, a small island of reflection amid the swirling currents of family dynamics. I considered the messages of worth and recognition I had received from my career, from friends who understood the rigor and discipline I brought to everything I did, and contrasted them with the dismissive attitude at the dining table. Each comparison added fuel to an internal fire, not of vengeance, but of determination to assert my presence and value in ways that could not be ignored. As I shuffled the lottery ticket between my hands, a sense of surreal possibility began to permeate my thoughts. What if, In the simplest, most overlooked gesture, something monumental could emerge. What if this night, marked by inequity and preference, could twist unexpectedly to favor the one who had been cast aside? I took a slow breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ebb slightly, replaced by an anticipatory pulse of hope. The soft clinking of dishes and muted laughter continued, and I allowed myself a moment of quiet visualization, the moment when recognition would finally land in my hands, when the narrative of favoritism would be challenged, not with confrontation, but with undeniable reality. I traced the edges of the ticket, letting my mind drift over numbers, probability, and chance, understanding that life often offers the most profound reversals in the smallest, most improbable packages. Each flicker of imagination added a layer of resolve, a strengthening of my inner conviction that I could not and would not be diminished by the casual neglect of those who should have celebrated me. The aroma of roasted turkey, sage, and cranberry sauce lingered in the air, clashing with the taste of bitter disillusionment on my tongue, a sensory contradiction that mirrored the internal battle unfolding within me. I imagined the eventual realization on their faces, the shift in energy that would come when the overlooked finally held the instrument of change, when the imbalance would be challenged not through words, but through an undeniable turn of fortune. As I stood there, ticket in hand, the room beyond seemed both distant and immediate, a stage for an unfolding drama where control, acknowledgement, and the perception of fairness were all in delicate suspension. I allowed myself to linger in that quiet moment, feeling the pulse of possibility and the simmering power of potential reversals, knowing that the evening was far from over and that the smallest actions often carry the seeds of the most extraordinary consequences. The kitchen became a sanctuary of reflection, a private stage where I rehearsed possibilities, examined grievances, and contemplated the quiet assertion of value that had long been deferred. Even as the sounds of familial celebration continued unabated, I felt a growing sense of inner alignment, a recognition that my response to the inequity of the moment could shape not only the outcome of the night, but also the broader trajectory of how I existed within my family. The ticket, small and seemingly inconsequential, rested in my palm, a symbol of chance, patience, and latent opportunity, reminding me that even in situations that appear dismissive or unfair, the possibility of transformation, recognition, and vindication exists, waiting for the right moment to surface. The realization settled gently, a quiet yet potent understanding that the night could still hold the extraordinary, and that the smallest, overlooked gestures often carry the greatest potential to alter perception, power, and the balance of attention within the microcosm of family life. I watched from the kitchen doorway as the family continued their animated conversations, laughter spilling into every corner of the room, and I felt the sharp contrast of my own solitude, like a cold draft seeping under a closed door. My sister Sophie was radiant, her excitement practically tangible as she described the poolside cocktail parties, the spa treatments, and the private balcony that awaited her on the cruise, while I sat with a silent, simmering ache, observing the disparity in how we were treated. My parents, Robert and Linda, offered her constant affirmations, their voices warm and encouraging, completely bypassing any acknowledgement of my presence, as though my very being had been rendered invisible for the night. I could hear the faint clatter of silverware against fine china and the soft rustle of napkins as I tried to occupy myself, my eyes drifting over the gleaming table, the golden turkey glistening under the chandelier light, the cranberry sauce shining like rubies, yet all of it felt meaningless in the shadow of blatant favoritism. I remembered the countless years of striving, of discipline, of proving myself worthy of recognition not just in my career as a high-ranking officer in the military, but in every aspect of life. And yet here, within the supposed sanctuary of family, my efforts were minimized, my achievements reduced to whispers drowned by applause directed elsewhere. The sense of betrayal deepened as I recalled the small, subtle patterns, how my accomplishments had always been background noise, how Sophie's successes were magnified, displayed, celebrated, and elevated in a way that made me question my own worth. I reached for the lottery ticket again, feeling its thin, creased surface. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe this small, overlooked token held more potential than anyone in the room could comprehend. My mind raced through possibilities, imagining the moment when reality might flip, when fortune could choose to acknowledge what the family so clearly had ignored. Each number on that ticket became a symbol of defiance, a quiet testament to the value and capability that had been overlooked for so long. I thought about my brother Ryan, who had tried in his own way to offer words of encouragement, yet even his well-meaning comments fell flat against the backdrop of the room's overt favoritism, leaving me to wrestle privately with the swell of emotions. The warm lights cast gentle shadows across the kitchen walls, but they did not warm the pit of frustration and longing that had been quietly growing in my chest. I envisioned the scene beyond the doorway as a stage where every gesture, every compliment, and every laugh reinforced the hierarchy that had been so clearly established, and I recognized the peculiar duality of my situation. I was simultaneously present and invisible, seen by no one, yet acutely aware of every interaction. My fingers absently traced the edges of the lottery ticket, feeling the slight texture beneath my touch, and I thought about the unpredictable ways that life sometimes shifts, the moments when what seems insignificant suddenly turns monumental. In the quiet of the kitchen, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to let the anticipation mix with the resentment, to embrace the possibility that something unexpected could emerge from what everyone else had dismissed as trivial. The murmur of conversation continued, punctuated by laughter and the occasional clinking of glasses, each sound reinforcing the contrast between my sister's celebrated presence and my own overlooked existence. I reflected on the years of service, the discipline, and the resilience that had defined my path, recognizing that while the family had its own hierarchy of attention and praise, my own accomplishments were not negated, they simply awaited their moment of undeniable recognition. I considered the simple randomness of the lottery ticket, its numbers a delicate balance of chance and opportunity, and I felt a surge of quiet determination that perhaps this overlooked object could serve as a catalyst for a reversal of fortune, a subtle yet profound shift in the narrative of the evening. The aroma of the feast, rich and enticing, contrasted sharply with the bitter taste of exclusion, and I let that bitterness fuel my resolve, imagining a scenario where the night could culminate in an unexpected, almost poetic, validation. The kitchen became my refuge, the solitary space where I could contemplate, strategize, and allow the tension of invisibility to ferment into purpose. Each passing moment intensified my focus, sharpening my awareness of the disparities and inequities that had long been present. And yet, in that sharpening, I found a strange form of clarity, a sense of readiness to witness, and perhaps influence, the unfolding of what might be a remarkable turn of events. I held the ticket to my chest again, feeling its potential, and allowed myself to envision the impact, the recognition, the validation, and the astonishment that could follow, knowing that sometimes the smallest, most dismissed objects carry the most profound power to transform perception and reality. The faint glow from the chandelier above flickered slightly, casting moving shadows that mirrored the oscillating tides of hope and frustration inside me, and I realized with a quiet, unwavering certainty that whatever happened next could not only challenge the established order in the room, but also affirm the value and presence I had long felt denied. I stepped back into the living room cautiously, the weight of the $5 lottery ticket pressing in my pocket, a tangible reminder that even small things can carry enormous potential. Sophie was still animatedly recounting the details of the cruise, the laughter spilling from her lips like sunlight through the windows, each gleam reflecting off the polished surfaces of the room, while I navigated the space with a quiet determination, aware that the family's focus was elsewhere, their attention captured entirely by her. I could feel the lingering sting of exclusion as my parents continued their praise, Robert leaning forward with an approving smile, Linda nodding with delight, their eyes never once drifting toward me with the same warmth or acknowledgement. I positioned myself near the edge of the room, observing the intricate choreography of attention and favoritism, noting the subtle ways in which my presence was minimized, the way the conversations flowed around me as though I were part of the furniture, functional but unnoticed. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint tang of cranberry sauce, the rich aromas a stark contrast to the hollow sensation building within me, a mixture of frustration, longing, and an unspoken defiance. I could hear Sophie giggling with Mia and Noah, her cousins, their voices intertwining in carefree excitement, and I felt an almost tangible separation, a line drawn so clearly that the unfairness of it all became a living, breathing entity in the room. I reflected on all the other holidays, the birthdays, the small achievements that had always been greeted with polite indifference on my part and enthusiastic celebration on hers, and I realized that this pattern had shaped my understanding of family recognition and love, often leaving me questioning my worth in subtle, lingering ways. I found a corner chair and sat down, the hard wood pressing against my legs, grounding me in the moment as I considered the possibility of change, a flicker of anticipation igniting in the midst of disappointment. The ticket felt heavier now, a small object imbued with hope, potential, and a sense of quiet rebellion against the established hierarchy. I began to imagine the cascading effects if something unexpected were to occur, if the unseen and undervalued could suddenly take center stage, and the thought brought a sharp edge of excitement to my pulse. The family continued their holiday rituals around me, passing plates, exchanging smiles, and raising glasses, and each movement seemed amplified, a reminder of how visible favoritism can be, how easy it is for acknowledgement to be distributed unequally. I thought about my time in the military again, about the discipline, the recognition, and the sense of accomplishment that had always been tangible in that world, contrasting it with the almost theatrical display of preferential treatment here at home, and I felt a quiet strength gathering within me. My mind raced through probabilities, scenarios, and outcomes, envisioning the moment when fortune could intervene, when a seemingly insignificant piece of paper could challenge perception and shift the balance of attention, creating a moment where the overlooked could assert presence without confrontation. I traced the ticket again. Nsrided. Rate rose rotted. Rotters, 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 and chance, and the thought that I could hold the power to alter the narrative, even temporarily, became increasingly compelling. I thought about the surprise, the astonishment, and perhaps even the embarrassment that might ripple through the room when a shift in fortune occurred, when attention could no longer be controlled by prior biases, and I felt the pulse of potential thrill building steadily. As the evening light dimmed, casting a warm glow over the polished hardwood and table settings, the quiet determination in me solidified, a resolution to witness, to experience, and perhaps even to command a small but meaningful reversal of perception. Every laugh, every compliment directed at Sophie, every nod and acknowledgement she received only intensified the simmering anticipation, sharpening my awareness that tonight something might change, that the ordinary could turn extraordinary, that the balance of recognition could be disrupted in the most unpredictable and satisfying way. I felt a deep, almost meditative clarity as I leaned back in the chair, ticket in hand, imagining the moment when the world could shift just enough for the overlooked to finally be seen, when the subtle, often ignored contributions, an inherent worth of one individual could no longer be dismissed, and the air itself seemed charged with the possibility of revelation. The room felt alive, humming with energy, while I allowed myself to embrace the tension, the contrast, and the hope, realizing that this Thanksgiving evening, which began in quiet disappointment, might very well hold the seeds of an outcome none of us could have anticipated, a moment where acknowledgement, value, and astonishment could collide in the most remarkable way, forever altering the perception of my place in the family and the weight of my presence. I shifted slightly, careful not to draw attention, the weight of the lottery ticket pressing against my jeans as a quiet reminder of the possibility that lingered like a pulse beneath the surface. The room was alive with conversation, Sophie animatedly sharing details of her upcoming cruise, her voice rising with excitement as she described the spa treatments, the gourmet meals, and the sun-soaked deck she would soon stroll upon, while I navigated the edges of the gathering with a sense of cautious observation, feeling the contrast of attention and recognition like a tangible current around me. My parents, Robert and Linda, continued their enthusiastic praises, leaning in to listen to every word Sophie uttered, their smiles wide and approving, leaving my own presence almost invisible, acknowledged only in passing, as if my contributions and achievements were irrelevant in the context of the evening. I could feel the familiar ache of exclusion, sharpened by the stark disparity of treatment, each gesture and glance reinforcing the unspoken hierarchy that had always existed. I found myself moving closer to the fireplace, seeking a sense of grounding in the warmth of the hearth, the amber glow casting soft shadows across the room, creating a subtle divide between the family's central display and my own quiet contemplation. The soft murmur of conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter, created a rhythm that emphasized the separation I felt, the uneven distribution of attention and validation, and I allowed myself a moment to breathe deeply, steadying the mix of frustration, hurt, and anticipation that swirled within me. I reflected on the countless occasions in my life when my dedication and achievements had been overlooked, the times I had been praised in subtle, understated ways compared to the overt celebration of Sophie's milestones, and I felt a simmering determination rise quietly beneath the surface, a resolve to witness, endure, and perhaps redirect the flow of acknowledgement in a way that could not be ignored. The texture of the ticket pressed against my palm, smooth and thin, yet imbued with the improbable potential that made my heart beat a little faster, and I considered the improbable nature of what might happen next, the way small, overlooked moments could unexpectedly pivot the trajectory of attention and recognition. I imagined a scenario where the mundane act of holding that ticket could transform into a moment of revelation, where the unnoticed and undervalued could finally assert presence and influence the perception of the entire room. The smell of roasted turkey, sage, and pumpkin pie mingled with the faint aroma of coffee and spiced cider, creating a rich sensory tapestry that contrasted sharply with the bitter sting of inequity. And I let that contrast sharpen my awareness, heightening every detail, every glance, every inflection in the voices around me. My gaze swept across the room, noting the subtle interactions, the unspoken favoritism, and the way my sister basked in unearned attention, her joy radiating outward, while I existed in the periphery, the quiet observer of a scene that should have included me more fully. I allowed myself to mentally rehearse possibilities, considering how the unexpected could emerge from the smallest sources, how a quiet, deliberate action could shift perception, attention, and even respect, and I felt the pulse of hope begin to take shape, steady and insistent. I thought about the family dynamic, the patterns that had long dictated recognition and acknowledgement, and realized that this evening, though seemingly ordinary, held the potential for a subtle but profound reversal, where chance could intervene and alter the established order without confrontation, allowing the overlooked to assert presence through circumstance alone. I pressed the ticket lightly against my fingers, feeling the weight of possibility and the improbable magnitude of what might unfold, and I let my imagination stretch, envisioning the surprise, the astonishment, and perhaps the quiet admiration that could ripple through the family when the moment arrived. The room hummed with warmth and conversation, yet I felt a concentrated stillness around me, a quiet bubble where anticipation and reflection intertwined, shaping the contours of my focus and my resolve. I thought of the years of effort, discipline, and perseverance that had defined my path, from the rigorous structure of military service to the personal milestones that had often gone uncelebrated within this family, and I allowed that history to fortify a sense of quiet, unshakable confidence that the coming events could finally provide tangible acknowledgement. Every sound, every glance, every laugh became a thread in the intricate tapestry of observation, reinforcing the anticipation, sharpening my awareness that a shift could occur at any moment and that the smallest object in my possession, the lottery ticket, could carry with it the instrument of transformation. I leaned back slightly, letting my body relax while my mind stayed alert, imagining the subtle shifts, the flickers of surprise, the dawning realization of those who had previously overlooked me, and I felt a steady surge of determination, a quiet but persistent expectation that the evening was far from ordinary and that the narrative of neglect and favoritism could soon be interrupted in a way that would demand attention, recognition, and perhaps a new understanding of my presence within the family. The warmth from the hearth bathed the room in amber light, flickering across faces and surfaces, creating a stage for what might come, and I allowed myself to feel the slow, deliberate rhythm of possibility, the sense that from the smallest, seemingly insignificant object, the narrative could pivot, and the overlooked could finally experience a shift in perception, acknowledgement, and influence. I finally decided to sit closer to the family circle, the $5 lottery ticket still secure in my hand, a small but significant connection to possibility that no one else seemed to notice. Sophie was recounting the details of the cruise to Aunt Karen and my cousins, her eyes sparkling with excitement, while I remained quietly observing, absorbing every nuance of the disparity unfolding before me. My father, Robert, leaned forward, gesturing animatedly, praising her travel plans and luxurious amenities, completely ignoring the years of hard work, discipline, and achievements I had quietly accumulated in my own life. I felt a twist of frustration and indignation, the sharp pang of invisibility mixing with the faintest glimmer of anticipation that maybe, just maybe, this night was not over, that something could still tilt in a different direction. My mother, Linda, poured another glass of wine for Sophie, her smile warm and approving. While I remained a spectator, the air around me thick with the unspoken hierarchy that had long defined our interactions. I could feel the subtle judgments, the quick glances that affirmed Sophie's elevated status in the family, and it stung, yet it also fueled a quiet fire within me, a determination to see the evening through on my own terms. The laughter and chatter continued, punctuated by the soft clinking of cutlery against porcelain and the occasional pop of a cork, creating a backdrop that made my exclusion all the more acute. I traced the edge of the lottery ticket, feeling the raised texture of the numbers, imagining the improbable possibilities that could unfold, and I allowed myself to consider that the smallest, most overlooked objects often carry the seeds of the most significant transformations. My gaze drifted to Sophie, carefree and radiant, and I thought about the long pattern of favoritism that had persisted for years, the small but persistent ways my accomplishments had been minimized, while hers were celebrated openly and exuberantly. I felt the quiet swell of empowerment, the knowledge that even in moments where recognition seemed absent, potential was quietly gathering, like a storm forming beyond the horizon, ready to shift everything in its path. I leaned back slightly, taking in the room, the warm glow of the chandelier reflecting off polished surfaces, the rich aroma of turkey, sage, and cinnamon filling the air. And I allowed myself to imagine the subtle ripple of astonishment that could come when the overlooked finally experienced acknowledgement, when the improbable became undeniable. Each sound, each glance, each soft laugh seemed to sharpen the contrast between what was and what could be, and I felt a mixture of patience and readiness settle over me, a quiet resolve that this evening could yet hold a pivotal moment. I considered the family dynamics, the years of indirect comparisons, subtle preferences, and overt affirmations directed towards Sophie, and I felt a steady pulse of determination, a recognition that the night could pivot without confrontation, that circumstance itself could become an instrument of balance and revelation. The lottery ticket in my hand, small, thin, seemingly inconsequential, began to symbolize more than chance. It became a conduit for change, a subtle instrument through which the evening's narrative could be altered, a reminder that attention, recognition, and even astonishment could emerge from the least expected sources. I allowed myself to imagine the quiet astonishment on my parents' faces, the pause in their laughter, the subtle shift in energy as attention moved, however briefly, to the one who had been overlooked. The kitchen and dining areas blended into a stage, every gesture, every whisper, every beam of light forming a backdrop for what might be a quietly transformative moment. I reflected on the discipline, resilience, and commitment that had defined my military career, and how those same qualities had shaped my character, fortified my patience, and prepared me to observe, endure, and perhaps ultimately assert presence in a way that could not be ignored. As I breathed deeply, the anticipation and tension mingled into a potent awareness, a recognition that the ordinary flow of the evening held the latent potential for extraordinary recognition, and that the smallest objects, the quietest individuals, often become the catalysts for the most remarkable reversals. The room hummed with the comfort and familiarity of family, yet beneath it lay a fragile and shifting undercurrent, the unspoken rules of attention, favoritism, and acknowledgement poised for disruption. I felt the momentum of possibility, a steady, unrelenting sense that the narrative of invisibility could be overturned, that the overlooked could finally command notice, and that the evening might culminate in a moment where acknowledgement, astonishment, and quiet validation could coexist. I held the ticket once more, its weight tangible, and allowed my mind to drift over the spectrum of outcomes, each one tinged with hope and subtle vindication, recognizing that in life and in family, the unexpected often arrives in the smallest, most overlooked forms, reshaping perception, recognition, and understanding in ways that no one anticipates. I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere as the evening progressed, the laughter and chatter of my family weaving through the room like a familiar but exclusionary melody. And yet I noticed a faint ripple, a change in the way attention lingered, almost imperceptibly, near the edge of where I sat. The $5 lottery ticket remained in my hand, crumpled just slightly, its weight a quiet reminder of the improbable possibilities that lay ahead, and I allowed myself to envision the moment when fortune could reveal something extraordinary, something that would command recognition in a way words never could. Sophie continued her animated descriptions, detailing the luxurious amenities of her cruise, the sparkling pool, the gourmet dining, and the private balconies, her excitement spilling into the room and drawing smiles and nods from my parents and cousins alike. Robert and Linda leaned in, their faces lit with admiration and encouragement, reinforcing the hierarchy of attention and validation that had defined so many gatherings before this one. I felt the familiar sting of being sidelined, a mix of frustration, hurt, and quiet determination forming a steady rhythm inside me, each beat a reminder that acknowledgement could be earned or arrived at in unexpected ways. I glanced around the room, noting the subtle gestures, the careful attention paid to Sophie, and I recognized the underlying narrative of favoritism, the silent but persistent affirmation of one child's value over another's. The air was thick with aromas of roasted turkey, sage, cinnamon, and freshly baked pumpkin pie, contrasting sharply with the bitterness of exclusion that coiled within me, and I let that contrast sharpen my focus, heightening each sensation, each thought, each possibility that flickered in my mind. My hand pressed the ticket slightly against my palm, feeling its potential, imagining the way the numbers could align, the improbable odds tipping in favor of the overlooked, and I allowed myself to anticipate the moment of revelation that could rewrite the perception of the evening. I thought about the years I had spent striving for recognition, the discipline, resilience, and accomplishments that had been quietly amassed in my military career, and I contrasted them with the selective applause my family offered to Sophie, the visible and celebratory attention lavished on her for gifts and gestures that seemed trivial in comparison to my own efforts. The tension coiled in my chest was tempered by a subtle anticipation, a sense that something extraordinary could emerge from the smallest and most unassuming source, a twist of circumstance that would compel attention, and perhaps even astonishment. I let my mind wander through scenarios, imagining the flicker of surprise in my parents' eyes, the pause in their chatter, the subtle but undeniable shift in energy as the overlooked gained presence, and I felt a quiet but growing exhilaration at the thought of this possible reversal. The chandelier cast gentle shadows across the polished hardwood floor, illuminating the scene with a soft golden glow, creating a stage where every gesture, glance, and smile was magnified, emphasizing the contrast between what was and what could be. I breathed slowly, allowing the mix of tension, hope, and determination to settle into a steady rhythm, understanding that the narrative of invisibility could be interrupted by circumstance alone, without confrontation, in a way that demanded attention and recognition. Each sound, the clinking of glasses, the soft rustle of napkins, the low hum of conversation seemed amplified, a subtle orchestra underscoring the drama of inequity, and I allowed my focus to remain steady, tracing the edges of the ticket, contemplating the improbability and the latent potential it represented. I thought about the way chance can alter perception, the way the most minor and overlooked objects can catalyze the most profound reversals, and I let that understanding settle in. A quiet but powerful conviction that this night, like so many others, could hold a moment of extraordinary shift. I imagined the astonishment, the subtle pause in recognition, and the ripple of attention that could spread through the room when what had been dismissed or overlooked suddenly became undeniable, and the thought sent a ripple of controlled excitement through me. The warm scents and soft lights of the Thanksgiving gathering contrasted with the inwardly charged anticipation, and I felt a sense of readiness, a quiet patience poised on the edge of potential revelation. The ticket, unassuming yet powerful in its symbolic presence, rested in my hand, a link to possibility, a quiet defiance against the established order of attention and value in my family, and I allowed myself to feel the subtle thrill of waiting for a moment that could arrive at any instant, the moment when the unseen would be seen and the overlooked finally acknowledged. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling the sense of the feast, the hum of family, the warmth of the room, and I let the mix of frustration, anticipation, and quiet hope coalesce into a focused determination, a certainty that the ordinary rhythm of the evening could transform into an extraordinary pivot, where recognition, astonishment, and validation would converge in a way that no one could have predicted. I felt the first flicker of possibility as I casually flipped the lottery ticket between my fingers, each crease and number suddenly taking on an almost magnetic significance, the thin paper vibrating with potential in a way that contrasted starkly with the stillness of the room. Sophie continued to bask in the glow of attention, laughing and recounting imagined scenarios of her upcoming cruise, with Mia and Noah, their voices threading through the air, filling every corner with light, yet simultaneously underscoring my absence from the central narrative. My parents, Robert and Linda, leaned in with expressions of delight, their faces illuminated with pride and approval for every detail she shared, completely overlooking the years of discipline, resilience, and accomplishments I had quietly accumulated in my own life, a glaring contrast that made the evening feel simultaneously festive and painfully unequal. I settled into the edge of the sofa, aware of the polished hardwood beneath my boots, the muted reflections of the chandelier dancing across the walls, and the persistent aroma of roasted turkey, sage, and pumpkin pie mingling with the subtle sting of exclusion, a sensory reminder of both warmth and inequity. The more I watched, the sharper the awareness became that attention, validation, and acknowledgement had been so unevenly distributed, a pattern etched into every family gathering, every holiday, every shared meal. I recalled the countless moments where my efforts were overshadowed, where my achievements had been quietly noted but never celebrated, and the frustration, hurt, and quiet determination to see recognition arrive swelled steadily within me. The lottery ticket felt heavier in my hand, a symbol not merely of chance, but of latent power, the improbable instrument through which the dynamics of the evening could shift, compelling notice without confrontation. I allowed myself to imagine the scene, the moment when the invisible would be visible, when the overlooked could command attention simply because circumstance aligned, and the thought sent a controlled thrill through me, a mixture of anticipation and calm determination. Each laugh, each gesture, each approving glance directed toward Sophie only heightened the contrast, making the potential of the unexpected all the more vivid in my mind, and I let that vision sharpen, infusing me with a quiet, patient energy. The warm glow of the chandelier cast shifting shadows across the table and walls, accentuating the microcosm of family dynamics, and I became acutely aware of the subtle power of perception, the way a small, overlooked element could suddenly pivot the balance, altering recognition, acknowledgement, and understanding. My chest tightened slightly as I considered the accumulation of small injustices, the repeated diminutions, and the long-standing pattern of preferential treatment, and yet beneath that tension, a resilient anticipation stirred, the belief that a moment could arrive where the narrative might shift dramatically, invisibility could be disrupted, and astonishment could ripple through the room. I pressed the ticket lightly to my palm, feeling the texture, the alignment of numbers, the improbable odds, and the potential magnitude of what could unfold, imagining the pause, the subtle hesitation, and perhaps even the astonishment that would ripple through my parents and family when they could no longer ignore what had been overlooked. The scent of the feast, the warmth of the room, and the soft hum of conversation became the stage for internal anticipation, every sensory detail amplifying the potential significance of the small, thin ticket in my hand. I envisioned the subtle, inevitable ripple effects, recognition slowly pivoting toward me, attention rebalancing, the quiet astonishment of those who had long underestimated my presence. My mind traced the path of possible outcomes, each one infused with quiet vindication, each one carrying the latent power to rewrite perception and acknowledgement within the family dynamic. The soft gleam of candlelight flickered across the walls, and I felt the rhythm of patience interwoven with excitement, a controlled awareness that the overlooked could emerge into visibility, that the ordinary could become extraordinary in a single, improbable moment. I thought of my own trajectory, the resilience, discipline, and unspoken accomplishments that had defined me, and I recognized that while the family might have missed acknowledgement for years, the unfolding evening could recalibrate perception, presence, and attention. The ticket remained in my hand, its unassuming presence now loaded with improbable potential, a quiet instrument of change, waiting for the precise alignment of circumstance and attention. I allowed my imagination to stretch across the room, envisioning the astonishment, the subtle recalibration of respect, and the ripple of awareness that could finally acknowledge the overlooked, and I felt a deep, patient thrill, the kind that builds quietly, imperceptibly, until the moment arrives and shifts everything in a single, undeniable pivot. The laughter, the conversation, the warmth of the room all formed a backdrop for what might be the most quietly dramatic moment of the evening, the moment when the unseen could be seen, the unnoticed acknowledged, and the subtle but powerful reversal of expectation could unfold in ways that would linger long after the room fell silent. I drew a slow breath, feeling the pulse of anticipation, the controlled energy, and the quiet exhilaration of knowing that from the smallest, most disregarded element, the most extraordinary turn of events could emerge, rewriting the dynamics, altering perception, and delivering recognition in a way that no one, not even my parents, could have predicted. I could feel the tension in the room shift almost imperceptibly, like the air itself had grown heavier with possibility, and I held the lottery ticket a little tighter, sensing that the improbable was inching closer to reality. The warmth of the room, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, contrasted with the icy realization of the pattern of favoritism that had been so carefully maintained for years, a pattern that had dictated whose achievements were celebrated and whose were quietly overlooked. Sophie continued her animated storytelling about the cruise, her voice bright, almost musical, as she described private decks, spa treatments, and lavish meals, while I remained at the edge, observing every movement, every glance, every subtle signal that reinforced the divide between us. My parents, Robert and Linda, leaned in with approving smiles, nodding and laughing at each detail, their attention fully consumed by her narrative, leaving mine unnoticed, almost irrelevant, a stark reminder of the inequity that had been quietly present for as long as I could remember. I sat slightly forward, tracing the numbers on the ticket with my fingers, feeling each printed line, each curve, each potential alignment that could transform this ordinary object into a pivot point for recognition, validation, and astonishment. The room hummed with conversation, clinking silverware, and soft laughter. But I felt a focused clarity, a sense that the narrative of invisibility could be challenged in ways no one expected, that a single, overlooked element could alter the perception of the entire evening. I recalled my years in the military, the discipline, the training, the perseverance required to achieve and maintain my position, and contrasted it with the dismissive acknowledgement I received here, in my own family, where effort, achievement, and character seemed secondary to spectacle and favoritism. The ticket felt like a talisman, a symbol of potential, defiance, and improbable victory, and I let myself imagine the moment when the room would shift, when the focus would turn toward the overlooked, when astonishment could ripple quietly but unmistakably through the family. I thought about the way chance often works, how the smallest, most underestimated elements can provoke the largest consequences, and I allowed myself a quiet thrill, a careful anticipation, knowing that this night might hold a reversal that was at once subtle and undeniable. The amber glow of the chandelier illuminated the polished surfaces of the dining area, reflecting off the golden turkey, the fine china, and the carefully arranged centerpieces, while shadows shifted gently across the walls, echoing the subtle oscillation of tension, anticipation, and possibility that I felt coiling within. I felt my pulse quicken slightly as I considered the astonishment that might come when what had been overlooked, disregarded, or minimized suddenly demanded attention, recognition, and validation, without confrontation, without assertion, simply because circumstance had aligned in a way that could not be ignored. Each laugh, each approving nod towards Sophie, each warm glance from my parents served as both a reminder of the inequity and a subtle amplifier of the potential impact. When the overlooked finally emerged into focus, I imagined the ripple of surprise, the subtle recalibration of perception, and the quiet astonishment that would accompany the moment when the balance of recognition was suddenly shifted. I allowed my mind to dwell on the improbable but possible, envisioning the faces around the table, the moment of pause, the blink of comprehension, and the unspoken acknowledgement that would follow. The warmth of the room, the rich scents, the flickering candlelight, and the muted hum of conversation created a backdrop of normalcy, masking the quiet but growing tension and anticipation that I felt, as though the very air was preparing to witness a moment of revelation. I traced the edge of the ticket again, feeling the faint texture beneath my fingers, imagining the alignment of numbers, the improbable mathematics of chance, and the power that could emerge from this small, unassuming object. I considered the years of quiet perseverance, the repeated demonstrations of competence and resilience that had often gone unnoticed, and the satisfaction that might accompany the moment when the cumulative worth of effort, discipline, and presence could be acknowledged in a single, transformative instant. I let the quiet anticipation settle over me like a mantle, balancing patience and excitement, understanding that the subtle and the overlooked often hold the key to the most remarkable reversals, and that tonight, in this warm, seemingly ordinary Thanksgiving gathering, such a reversal was poised to unfold. Every glance, every laugh, every whispered exchange became a backdrop, a stage set for the improbable, and I felt a controlled exhilaration, knowing that the narrative of invisibility could finally be interrupted, and that the overlooked might finally be seen, acknowledged, and quietly celebrated in a way that could not be dismissed or ignored. I breathed slowly, feeling the mingled tension and anticipation align, the ticket a constant reminder of possibility, the room a living tableau of expectation and potential, and I understood that what was about to unfold could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, shifting perception, recognition, and awareness in ways that would resonate long after the night had ended. I felt a subtle shift in the energy of the room as the evening continued, the warmth of conversation and laughter, providing a familiar backdrop while an undercurrent of anticipation threaded through my awareness, growing stronger with each passing moment. The $5 lottery ticket rested lightly between my fingers, thin and unassuming, yet charged with the quiet potential of disruption, a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked elements can upend expectation in profound ways. Sophie continued her animated chatter, describing her cruise itinerary with vivid excitement, while my parents, Robert and Linda, leaned in, their eyes bright with approval and pride, creating a scene of celebration that emphasized the disparity of attention and acknowledgement between us. I noticed every nuance, the way glances lingered, the subtle gestures of favor, the tone of voices, all of it reinforcing the familiar pattern of preferential treatment, yet simultaneously magnifying the anticipation of what might come next. I shifted slightly in my seat, feeling the polished hardwood beneath me, the soft glow of the chandelier reflecting off the dining table, the rich aroma of roasted turkey, sage, and pumpkin pie mixing with the tension and quiet excitement building inside me. I reflected on my years of discipline and achievement in the military, the long hours, the meticulous training, the quiet persistence that had shaped me, and contrasted it with the way familial recognition had been selectively distributed, a poignant reminder of how often effort and value can be invisible until circumstances demand acknowledgement. My pulse quickened subtly as I considered the improbable possibilities, imagining the moment when the overlooked could assert presence without confrontation, when the focus might pivot purely because fortune or circumstance required it, and the anticipation of that shift lent a vibrancy to my attention and awareness. Each detail, the gleam of the chandelier, the pattern of shadows on the walls, the soft clinking of silverware, the laughter that echoed through the room seemed amplified, part of a larger tableau where subtlety and chance could create a moment of undeniable impact. I traced the numbers on the ticket with my fingertips, feeling the faint raised texture, imagining the alignment that could transform this ordinary object into an instrument of recognition, astonishment, and subtle vindication. I thought of the ripple effects that might follow, the pause in conversation, the fleeting glance of surprise, the sudden awareness that shifts attention and acknowledgement, and I allowed myself to feel the controlled excitement that accompanies the anticipation of such a moment. My gaze swept across Sophie, radiant and animated, and I considered the long pattern of familial favoritism, the repeated diminishment of my own presence, and the quiet but resolute satisfaction that might accompany a reversal of attention without a word being spoken, only circumstance, creating the effect. I breathed slowly, grounding myself in the rhythm of the evening, balancing the tension and excitement, feeling the latent energy coalesce into a quiet anticipation that the narrative of invisibility could be interrupted, and that the overlooked might finally be seen in a way that was inescapable and undeniable. The room seemed to hum with ordinary warmth, but beneath it was a quiet stage of potential, a setting where the improbable could unfold, where the subtle and overlooked could step into prominence, and where recognition could arrive in an unexpected yet perfectly inevitable fashion. I imagined the astonishment that could ripple through the family, the subtle recalibration of attention and acknowledgement, and the quiet satisfaction that accompanies the arrival of deserved recognition, especially when it emerges from the most unassuming and improbable of sources. I let the anticipation build within me, feeling it thread through every observation, every detail, every shadow and reflection, and I allowed a faint, controlled smile to play across my face as the possibility of transformation grew tangible, anchored in the small ticket that seemed, at once, both ordinary and extraordinary. The soft hum of conversation, the warm glow of candlelight, the lingering aroma of the Thanksgiving feast, all formed a backdrop against which the tension, expectation, and quiet excitement within me could intensify, each element magnifying the sense that the evening was approaching a subtle but profound pivot. I pressed the ticket lightly between my fingers, feeling the weight not just of chance, but of potential acknowledgement, validation, and recognition. A reminder that the overlooked often carry the seeds of the most remarkable reversals, and that tonight, in this warm, familiar setting, the balance of attention and presence might shift in ways that no one could have anticipated. I allowed my thoughts to wander through the probable astonishment, the pause in awareness, the subtle acknowledgement that could ripple through my parents, my sister, and the rest of the family, and I felt a controlled surge of exhilaration, knowing that sometimes the smallest, most disregarded objects hold the power to redefine perception and recalibrate recognition. The room, with its warmth, light, laughter, and conversation, became a canvas, each sensory detail a brushstroke in a quiet but intricate narrative where the improbable, the overlooked, and the unnoticed might finally take center stage, and I felt the steady rhythm of anticipation, the pulse of possibility, and the exhilaration of knowing that the evening was far from ordinary and that an extraordinary turn of events might unfold at any moment. The echoes of that Thanksgiving night still linger in my mind, not as a wound, but as a quiet reminder of what has changed in the way I see myself and my place in the world. Life now feels more grounded, more measured, and despite the imperfections that remain in family dynamics, there is a clarity and a sense of freedom I had never fully embraced before. I have learned that our value is not defined by the recognition we receive from others, even those we love most, and that self-respect and personal boundaries are the most powerful gifts we can offer ourselves. It is okay to step back, to observe, to protect our emotional and financial well-being, and to trust the instincts that guide us through challenging relationships. To anyone listening who has felt unseen, undervalued, or betrayed, know that your story, your resilience, and your intuition matter more than the opinions or actions of others. Healing begins the moment we choose to honor ourselves, to reclaim our narrative, and to align with what truly reflects our worth. I encourage you to take the time to breathe, to reflect, and to allow yourself the grace to grow independent of external approval. Embrace the quiet power of your own life, let the universe guide the next steps, and trust that the right people, opportunities, and experiences will recognize your intrinsic value. I am deeply grateful for this moment of reflection, for the chance to share this journey, and for each listener who allows these words to resonate within them, reminding us that none of us are truly alone, that our experiences connect us, and that through awareness and courage, we can step into a life defined by our own terms. Please, if this story touches your heart, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your city or country, and your local time. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to join us in these conversations of resilience, healing, and self-discovery. Emily Carter, 30. And the core lesson I want to share with you is, never let anyone else define your worth.